After my husband's funeral, I went to my nephew's birthday party. My sister's son had turned 1. And then she suddenly announced that my son was my husband's. So, by inheritance, I was entitled to half of his $75 million house. She even showed me his will. I said, "Okay, I understand," and barely managed to keep myself from laughing. Because he was my husband. Before we continue, please write down which country you are watching this video from and how old you are. Enjoy listening. A few days after my husband's funeral, I went to my sister's son's first birthday party. I was 34 at the time, a widow, which sounds like a foreign word, as if it's not about me. Andre and I had been together for 11 years, and a stroke took him away suddenly, without warning, and everything around me became a blur. Phone calls, papers, voices asking questions, and you nod because you have to, not because you understand anything. The party was in Senya's cramped rented apartment. Balloons, ribbons, someone cutting a cake in the kitchen, children's laughter in the room. And in my head, there was a buzz from lack of sleep and emptiness. My parents sat by the window, tense as if afraid to breathe. People glanced at each other, whispered, and I chalked it up to awkwardness. It's not every day that a woman from the recent cemetery comes to someone else's party. Ashley appeared dressed up, with a bow in her hands, the child laughing, reaching for a spoon, cheeks hot. Healthy. She didn't even look at me properly, walked around the guests, took a glass, tapped on the glass to silence everyone, and said loudly, clearly, as if she had rehearsed it beforehand, "Thank you for coming. This year has been difficult. I've been hiding something, but I can't anymore." She put her hand on the child's head, looked straight at me, and said more quietly, but so that everyone could hear, "Ethan is not Jason's son. Ethan is Andre's son." Some people exhaled, some sniffed. I felt as if I had been pulled out of myself for a second, not by the meaning of her words, but by her audacity, by how easily they came out of her mouth. Ashley took a folded sheet of paper out of her purse, unfolded it on the table, and turned it toward those closest to her. Michael knew everything and had managed to change his will. There, in black and white, half of their house was left to my son as an inheritance. And besides, the house is worth about $72 million. Luke and I need something to live on. She said it almost casually, like the price of a bag of potatoes. Faces turned to me, strangers, relatives, wary. Mom lowered her eyes to her plate. Dad straightened up as if he were about to get up and stop what had already been said. And I heard my voice, calm and steady, like someone who finally understood where they were. "I understand." And I smiled with the corner of my lips because laughter was already rising in my throat. And I held it back only with the habit of an adult to keep a straight face when necessary. I am Grace. I turned 34 that year. And I never thought that grief could be so quiet, no screams or tears, just a rusty creak inside when you open the door and it's empty. And the mug is out of place because no one moves it anymore. Andre and I met many years ago at a charity event, and from the very first day, he turned out to be one of those men who are described as reliable. Smart, attentive, generous, without pretension. He proposed on the Hudson River waterfront, as the sunset fell on the water like in old postcards, and I remember his hands, warm and confident. Then there was our apartment in an old New York house with a yard where you could hear children playing ball in the evenings. The apartment had crooked walls and high ceilings. But we fixed it up, little by little, room by room, like pulling ourselves out of a difficult life, patiently, without unnecessary words. We never had children, doctors, tests, cues, hopes that you fold neatly each time, like winter clothes in a closet, and take out each time as if they were new. 4 attempts, and the path home from the clinic, where no one speaks because it is clear without words. That evening, Michael said we would still live beautifully. You and me, that's enough, and he said it in such a way that I believed him. We lived as best we could, worked, saved up for repairs, sometimes went to the sea, came back and thought again about our kitchen, about the old doors that needed to be restored. Ashley was always somewhere in the background of our happiness, the youngest, bright, quick-witted, and quick to act. Her parents pitied her, as they know how to pity their weak ones, turning a blind eye, pulling her out of debt, calling me, asking me to understand and forgive. Because she hadn't settled down yet. I understood as best I could, but I kept my distance. With a sister like that, you have no choice, otherwise she'll live in your life as if it were her own passing yard. When she gave birth to Ethan, I knitted him a blanket, a tedious, stubborn task. Stitch by stitch, to make a warm square that could be placed under his side so he could sleep peacefully. I came to the maternity ward with flowers and a blanket, held the baby in my arms, and thought that this was probably how it would be. I, the aunt who would take over, sit with him, bring formula if necessary. Michael kept his distance then, and I chalked it up to our history. It hurt us both to look at other people's children, and only we understood that. And then that day came, Andre's bag by the door. My head was a little light, but it was okay, it would pass, a quick kiss, a promise to call after meeting with a client. The call came, but not from him. Come, they said. When I walked in, it had already happened. The doctors spoke in familiar voices, quickly, saying there was nothing that could be done, and I looked at them and thought, how is that possible? Nothing. If, as usual, the kitchen window hadn't closed properly that morning and needed to be tightened, otherwise it would rattle. The funeral passed, like pain passes, by someone else's hands. I stood there, listened, nodded, and the whole time it seemed that Michael was late, but he was about to come in, because he couldn't not come when he was expected. But it wasn't him who came, it was silence. And soon, it was Senya's birthday, which couldn't be missed because family is the most important thing, as Mom said, and at moments like this, there's no point in arguing. And here was her voice, her paper, her half of the house, as if she were talking about how to divide the herring on the table. I stood and watched this scene as if it were a bad play, where the actress confuses her intonations and the audience feels awkward, but it's already inconvenient to leave. I understand, I repeated, and took a sip of water to hide the smile that was begging to come out. Why I barely managed to keep from laughing is a separate story. And Ashley, of course, didn't know about it yet. Until the day Ashley brought her truth out into the open for everyone to discuss, our story had taken a completely different course, quiet, smooth, human. Andre and I met at a charity event. Children, hospitals, a donation box at the entrance, tables with lots, paintings, ceramics. Someone brought vinyl records from their grandmother's trunk. I was helping the organizers lay out the cards, checking the list, fixing the tags, and everyone was looking at one watercolor painting. Evening New York sat on the embankment, heavenly ripples, warm light in the windows, nothing unusual, but I couldn't take my eyes off it. Michael stepped into this hustle and bustle like a man who knows why he came, said hello, smiled, made a couple of bids. And he raised the price of the watercolor so high that the room came alive. He won and immediately came up to me. You've been looking at it all evening, he said, as if he had known me for a long time. It belongs in your house. And he handed me the painting. I was confused and embarrassed, and he, as always, took a half step back, without pressure, without games, just humanly. The next day, we were already sitting in a small cafe near the metro. We drank strong tea from glasses in glass holders and talked about things that people don't usually talk about on a first date, fears, plans. How the kitchen should smell in the evening, like bread or roasted apples. Michael was a corporate lawyer, smart but unpretentious, the kind of person who remembers the names of waiters and thanks the yard worker by name. He was a good listener, and with him, the internal noise subsided, like after a thunderstorm. 8 months later, he proposed on the waterfront. Water flowed below, bringing coolness from the river, and the sunset thickened above the rooftops, like the very watercolor with which it all began. He didn't make a long speech, he just took out the ring, took my hand, and I suddenly saw clearly our whole future life, the dishes we would choose at the market, the faucet that would need to be repaired in the spring, and arguments about which curtains would be more humane for the old windows. We got married quietly, for our own sake. And soon after our first anniversary, we embarked on an adventure. We bought a house in an old New York house with a yard and a well. The ceilings were almost 10 feet high, the walls were cracked, the wiring was prehistoric, but the windows looked out onto the yard and the sun. And there was space on the balcony for a box of cigarettes. It was an unthinkable amount of money for us, we had to count every penny, but Michael became a partner at that time, business picked up, and word of mouth brought in new clients. So we decided to take the risk. I saw a children's rug in the shade of ivy and little boots at the doorstep, an image that sustains a woman in difficult times. We took the simplest path to that image. Doctors, tests, procedures, hope postponed for a week, a month, until the next protocol. 4 IVF attempts, each like a step you climb, as if you are about to take another step and there will be a landing, but there is no landing. We drove home from the clinic in silence, and I looked out the window. He held my hand over the armrest, and that touch was like a warm heating pad on my lower back, not taking away the pain, but helping me get through it. At home, we poured ourselves a cup of tea and sat in the kitchen for a long time. And Michael said calmly, without drama, that we would still live well. You and me, that's enough. And he said it in such a way that I believed him. Then everything really did work out, without any ostentatious joy. We worked and spent our weekends walking in Central Park in Manhattan, sometimes going to the sea for a week. We would come back and get back to work on our house, changing the wiring, sanding the frames, choosing paint not based on fashion but on light. Michael helped me with my first independent projects, drove around with samples, patiently sat through measurements. Sometimes offered solutions that made things easier and cheaper, and I was amazed at how much a calm head can decide in this life. He knew how to be a support, not loudly, not ostentatiously, just taking on what was difficult for me and stepping back when he saw that I was already coping. The apartment gradually turned into a house. We found a craftsman who carefully restored the old doors, put a wide table in the kitchen, the very one where we would later wait, rejoice, and be silent. Petunias bloomed on the balcony, and a watercolor took its place on the wall in the living room. Evening New York, warm light, a boat at the pier, a quiet picture of the stability that exists in the world if you turn on the lamp in time. And children, we learned to live without that word, in our daily planning, at first bitterly, then simply smoothly. No despair, no self-pity, just a careful revision of plans, instead of a nursery, a study with bookshelves. Instead of sleds in the storage room, suitcases, because let's go to Boston, Massachusetts in the winter. I've wanted to see the snow in the old city for a long time. And indeed, we have learned to choose joy within our means, not the kind that is measured by loud events, but the kind that fits in a kettle. In fresh bed linen, in conversation in the kitchen under the clock. Ashley was spinning around the house in those years, as always, sometimes closer, sometimes disappearing for months, then calling again with a sigh, with a request. With promises to start all over again. Her parents felt sorry for her, and I tried to keep my distance so that neither she nor her flighty mind would destroy our carefully constructed order. Andre and I didn't argue about her then. Everyone in the family has someone they cherish. Otherwise, you can't hold on yourself. It seemed to me that life was finally back on track. Work, house, rare trips, evenings when you can hear children playing ball in the yard, and it doesn't hurt. And it is precisely at such moments, when everything has settled down and is breathing quietly, that life is arranged in such a way that someone's pebble is bound to knock on the glass. How he flew will be discussed in the next part. Ashley always lived at a short distance, quickly catching fire and quickly cooling down. She promised to start on Monday and postponed that Monday from month to month. Then Jason appeared, working in a bar, tattoos on his forearms, a motorcycle that made our parents cringe like a draft. They would have arguments out of nowhere, then passionate reconciliations, the kind where they slam doors loudly and swear just as loudly that everything will be different now. I kept my distance, other people's passions, like strong spices, a little more than normal, and the whole soup tastes bitter. Ashley announced her pregnancy at a regular family dinner in late fall. There was no solemnity, just all of us at the table, steam rising from the potatoes, my mother's favorite embroidered napkin, and suddenly tears, trembling lips. Hands on her waist. The words sounded as if she didn't believe herself, but we were already supposed to be happy. I felt a twinge inside, like an old scar when the weather changes. Not envy, no, just the memory of a body that also dreamed. I took a deep breath then. I offered my sincere congratulations and decided that I would be the aunt who helps out without unnecessary conversation. Ethan was born strong, warm, with a surprised look at the degenerates, as if he didn't expect to see us. I came to the maternity ward with flowers and a blanket that I knitted in the evenings, stitch by stitch, thought by thought, so that the baby would be soft and calm. From the very first days, Ashley called often. He's crying non-stop, I can't get anything done, can you sit with him at night? I sat, rocked him, sang old nursery rhymes in a low voice, put the kettle on, and whispered, breathe, Grace, it will all pass. Michael was warm toward his nephew, but kept himself a little apart, not imposing himself, as if preserving some quiet inner order of ours. At the time, I explained it simply. It was still painful for the two of us to touch on the subject of childhood, even if it was someone else's booties on the dresser. Then came the morning that changed everything. Michael grimaced, his head was buzzing, but he couldn't miss the meeting, so he smiled. Like a man who wasn't used to complaining. I handed him his scarf, we agreed to call each other after lunch, and the phone rang with a strange voice. Then everything went like in the hallway of a clinic, people in identical robes, short phrases that didn't warm the ears, and silence falling on the shoulders like a heavy coat. When I returned home, there was a thin porcelain mug in the kitchen sink. The bottom was lightened by an unfinished morning, and it was the only thing that seemed real that day. The funeral and memorial service were as if someone else had gone through them for me. We chatted, made arrangements, brought funeral pastries, and I caught myself listening, waiting for a familiar door to slam. Ashley spent all her time writing about Luca's temperature or the nanny who had backed out at the last minute and came for a short time as a guest. With a taxi already waiting at the building entrance. I didn't say anything. Sometimes silence is the only politeness you have the strength for. The week after the funeral dragged on like cold jelly. Mom called every day, not so much to talk as to remind me that I had to live. And then it turned out that it was Luca's first birthday. I would have gladly hidden under the covers and not come out until spring, but Mom said her usual thing, family is important, Andre would want you to go. So I got up, washed the cups, picked up a gift, and went. Senya's house, a rental on the outskirts, where the yard workers know everyone by sight. Inside, there were balloons and birthday posters, the kitchen smelled of sweet cream and coffee, children were laughing in the room, adults were whispering. As if I had brought the winter air with me. Dad perked up when he saw me, Mom fiddled with a napkin, embarrassed to look up. I stood there and thought how strange it was to be at a celebration when you have a different calendar and different dates inside. Ashley came out dressed up, with a glow on her face that looked more like stage lighting than genuine joy. She clinked her spoon, and the glass asked for silence, and from her exhalation I already understood that now it would not be about candles or the baby. She had a folded piece of paper in her purse, and it was because of that paper that I would soon have to hold back my laughter so hard that my cheeks would ache. Ashley tapped her spoon on the glass, and when the noise subsided, she spoke with such confidence, as if she were standing not in a rented apartment but on stage, thanking everyone for the celebration. She sighed about the difficult year and placed her hand on Luke's head. "I've been hiding it," she said, "but I can't anymore. Ethan is not Jason's son. Ethan is Andre's son." It was as if the air had been turned off in the room. Someone had pulled the tablecloth. A cup clattered against the table. Dad sat up straight. Mom stared at her napkin as if she could fall into its embroidery. Ashley didn't stop, took a folded sheet of paper out of her purse, spread it out on the table, leaned forward. "Michael knew everything. He changed the will. Half of their house to my child. Rightfully so." She said it dryly, like the amount on a receipt. Several people moved closer and whispered. I looked at her and thought not about the words, but about how skillfully she held the pause and her gaze, rehearsed. "May I?" I asked calmly and reached for the paper. She flinched slightly, apparently expecting a scream, but receiving a polite request instead. I unfolded the sheet. There was no notary registration number, just a stamp, as if it had been stamped on a photocopier. The notary's surname had a mistake in one letter. The date was Sunday, and they don't have appointments on that day. The wording was from someone else's form. They don't write heir by blood like that. The signature looked like it, but it wasn't his. Andre always has a short line after the A, and Nesterov doesn't have loops, but here there was a wide arc, like a schoolboy who is trying hard to write beautifully. I folded the sheet as neatly as it had been folded, returned it to Senna, and said in the same even voice, "Thank you for showing me. I have to go." Her lips trembled, and that was all. "You're fine." "Not here," I replied. "Today is Luca's celebration. We'll discuss it calmly." I turned to my parents, hugged my dad, and nodded to my mom. Her eyes were wet, not from compassion, but from fear that a scene was about to begin. No one started anything. The yard smelled of chilled cream and wet rubber from baby strollers. I walked to the car, got in, closed the door, and exhaled as if after a long dive. Laughter came to me, not cheerful, but the kind that comes when a lie is told carelessly and brazenly. I held onto the steering wheel and thought about how confident she was that everyone around her was stupider than they needed to be. But the main thing wasn't even in the paper. Ashley didn't know the main thing and couldn't know it. And the main thing wasn't in her purse, it was somewhere else, where paper couldn't be forged. In the morning, I'll go to the place where the truth is kept. I started the morning not with phone calls, but with a trip to the place where the things that cannot be forged are kept. The bank manager recognized me, said, "Keep quiet," and led me into the viewing room. A metal box, a key, silence in which you can hear your heart beating. And a folder, packed by Andre while he was still alive, neatly arranged according to his instructions. Transparent files, stickers with dates, signatures in neat handwriting. On top was the notarized will, seals, registration number, witnesses, everything as it should be, without any crooked loops. The beneficiary, me, without reservations and by blood. The will was drawn up by our friend, lawyer Robert Miller, and it was not a piece of paper from a purse, but a document that lives in the registry, not in a chat. Underneath it were medical papers, a urologist's report, the protocol for surgery for varicocele and, during the same period, for azoospermia. The dates were 2 years before Luca's birth. In a separate file were the results of follow-up tests a few months later. Azoospermia, a dry line that explains more than any words. We decided not to tell anyone at the time. There had been too many questions before, too much sympathy that made us want to hide under the covers. 3 people knew: Michael, me, and the attending physician. The file is a thin softcover notebook. Michael didn't like drama, but he liked order. Once, after one of our family dinners, he sat on the edge of the bed and said, "I don't want this to come between you, but I'm not going to keep quiet either." Then, while I was on a long work call, Ashley leaned closer to him than was appropriate, joked with a hint, and put her hand on his sleeve. He pulled away, then told me about it for the first time, and we decided not to make a big deal out of it, blaming it on the wine and her eternal desire to cross boundaries. We didn't make a big deal out of it, but we didn't forget it either. A couple of weeks later, he brought this notebook, saying he would write down everything that seemed strange. Not because I like drama, but so that we wouldn't be labeled crazy, just in case. In the notebook, dates, places, short quotes. I popped into the office for a minute. I invited him to lunch, a night message, with an ambiguous joke, tried to hug him in the hallway. He said I couldn't do that. Nothing extra, just stating the facts. A little lower down, printouts of Senya's correspondence with her friend Zana. That was when I first saw how easy it is to type someone else's words if they are not for you. If you play your cards right, you can get half of it. Your friend will sign it like in real life. She's rolling in money anyway, she'll share. Those phrases were enough to make my throat dry, like chalk. Michael added a letter from Yuri Vlasov to the folder. I confirm that the will was drawn up by me. A copy is kept by a notary. The original is with the client. I am ready to confirm its legality and date. Yuri is one of those who speaks calmly and rarely, but when he does speak, you can rely on him. At the bottom of the papers is an envelope with my surname on it. Andrei's handwriting is even, without embellishment. I held it in my palms for a long time, like you hold a mug of hot tea to warm yourself without burning yourself. I opened it. My faith. If you are reading this, it means that something I did not want has happened. I would have preferred to live 100 years and deal with any of Zena's antics myself, but life doesn't ask. Here is everything you need so that no one hurts you. Please don't let anyone confuse your gentleness with submissiveness. I love you. Michael. Nothing superfluous, again, just as he lived, so he wrote. I folded the letter back up, stared at one spot longer than usual to calm my trembling, and began to collect the package, the will, into a separate folder. I put the documents, with copies, the notebook, into my bag, along with printouts of the correspondence, under the elastic band. On the cover, I wrote truth in large letters with a pencil. It's easier to wrap my head around that way. The road from the bank was different than the one there. I'm driving, and for the first time in several days, I'm breathing more deeply. The sadness hasn't gone away, it can't, but clarity has settled in with it. There's no need to argue in raised voices, no need to prove the obvious. Everything has already been said in stamps and numbers. At home, I turned on the kettle. I took out our favorite heavy mug, the one made of thin porcelain that wouldn't hold up, and dialed Yuri's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice as calm as in his letter. Grace, my condolences. What happened? I briefly told him about the will in the purse, about Andrei's child, about the apartment being divided in half. He listened without sighs or exclamations, only clarifying the dates a couple of times. I'll be waiting for you tomorrow, he said. Take everything from the safe deposit box. And one more thing, we'll need someone who knows how to dig, but does it cleanly. I'll give you the contact. I hung up the phone, rested my fingers on the warm ceramic, and realized that from now on it would be about work, not emotions. And if Senya had a piece of paper from her purse, I had a folder with the truth and people who knew how to get things done. I didn't know then that the person who digs would soon bring such a dose of reality into my house that even my mother would lose the habit of closing her eyes. Yuri saw me without an appointment, in his office in an old mansion, with dark wood and a window overlooking the yard. He listened silently, only occasionally clarifying dates. I laid out the folder from the safe deposit box on the table, the will, the medical records, Andrei's notebook. Yuri ran his finger over the seals and nodded, it was real. Then he took the piece of paper from Senya's purse, the one she had shown at the birthday party, and he didn't even need a magnifying glass. The wording was not notarized, the date was Sunday, the registration number was fake, and the signature was someone else's. We'll submit it to the Department of Justice, and the examination will confirm it. But he looked at me over his glasses. The question was not just about the papers. The question was, how do you want to deal with this? I answered honestly that I didn't want a public scandal. And I didn't want revenge. But I wouldn't let Andrei's memory be squandered. Yuri nodded, which meant we would act like adults. The first option is to file a report of fraud and forgery. The second is a private arrangement. We document the falsehood, demand a public retraction, and draw up a legal agreement that will protect you and your child. In both cases, we need facts. I would bring in our guy, he digs carefully, leaves no traces. He dictated a number, Fedor Dolgov, a former detective. Fedor arrived around noon, stocky, short haircut, jacket without unnecessary pockets. He greeted me as if we had known each other for 100 years, sat down, and took out a notebook. Tell me everything in order. I told him about the birthday, the will, the reaction of the relatives. He asked simple questions about Jason, Senya's job, housing, parents, and wrote down brief notes, just like Michael in his notebook. Give me a couple of days, he said as he left. I'll look at income and expenses, rent, hospitals, alimony, phone activity. I'll be back with answers. Those couple of days dragged on viscously, like rain on glass. I lived by the clock, shower in the morning, tea, a couple of work calls, and by evening, silence in which memories hummed. On the third day, Yuri called himself.